It's this really cool example of cutting edge protein engineering done in a really fun, playful way. If you hear her story, she's like, I was making my husband eat this yeast out of a falcon tube. And that's what we want.
Hey, Erum, what's going on?
It's very busy in the world of biotech. There's so much going on. We've been quite busy.
Yeah, I mean, markets are very volatile. And so that means more work for us to do because everybody needs help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we've been traveling. So although we're working when we're traveling, it's time to put pen on paper. And now we're in full grind mode for the next few weeks, just churning out deliverables for our clients, doing research, hanging out with our AIs and seeing what they're up to and how they can help us. And then plan more travel and events coming up in the near future.
Exactly. Well, I mean, last week we went out to dinner with a bunch of our friends on Monday night. And then you ended up going to the AI Emergence Summit. What was that about?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I think it was more of a sensationalized title. I mean, when people think of AI emergence, it's like emergence. Oh my gosh, AGI. And that was the topic of the first session. And they had an author on the panel and two entrepreneurs that are venture backed and they're generating revenue that are developing AI tools. And across the board, the whole concept of AGI becoming fully autonomous was years and years down the road. Some people in the social circles of tech entrepreneurs predict 2 to 5 years, but the people on the panel are like, nope, there's just so much to do, like cleaning data, making sure that the models are built correctly. The big takeaway was models aren't moats, but the type of data you have, the amount of data you have, the way it's structured, those are more moats at this time. That AI is going to be commoditized, as it was a great takeaway, and used in different ways. The CEO founder of Osmo.ai, the digital nose, he spoke a lot. He's the one who actually led the models aren't moats session, and how he and his team at Osmo are creating a moat is they are collecting a lot of smell intelligence, and they have people working in India that smell things and enter information.
Wow.
So they have like
That's crazy.
A smell farm, I guess you can say, smell data farm. And they're just collecting smell information or notes, I guess you can say. Oh my gosh. Bob Weinstein, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry, I'm not representing the world of fragrance very well, but it was very cool. I met a lot of great people. The summit was hosted by this network called the AI Circle, which they convene regularly. They have people from big tech to startups that come and speak about certain topics. I think they really liked speaking with me because I was actually talking about an application of AI to biology, because a lot of people are working on the infrastructure of AI and gets really deep on that layer. But then when I bring biology into it, like, oh my gosh, that's an interesting use case, and blah, 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 and we go down that journey.
So much data. How
Yes.
do you store it? If you had to summarize your takeaway in one line, what would it be?
Yeah, models aren't moats. Data is everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you went to that, and after we talked to our guest, you were talking about using AI to look at your own healthcare data and come up with a guide. How has that worked out?
Yeah, I'm still continuing the journey. Dan Goodwin, today's guest, before he interviewed us. So you guys, if you want to hear us being interviewed, check out the Climate Biotech podcast where Karl and I are speaking to the amazing community of the Homeworld Collective. But before we were interviewed, as we're waiting for people to come into the call, Dan was telling me about his experience downloading his 23andMe data and using ChatGPT's deep research to analyze it. And he was just wowed. It was like 50 pages of analysis. And then I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm like, I've done 23andMe. I haven't splurged on the deep research account for ChatGPT, but Perplexity gives you a few deep research searches for free per month, I think, at this time in our world. So I was using Perplexity and I took my 23andMe data, I upload it, and it was just very cautious. Like Perplexity does a good job of trying to put guardrails on data and not overstate things. So there was a lot of disclaimers. Let's just say that. It's like, oh, this is your genetic information. You can't infer a lot of things. Be careful with all this information. And it said all you really have in this data package is a lot of information on chromosome 1, and it has a bunch of SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms, just like little bits and pieces of your genetic information. And it could have information on that. But It didn't tell me too much. I tried to get around, like, just tell me what it says. Don't worry about it. I'm going to go to my doctor. I'm not going to take this word verbatim. And it still wasn't giving me a lot of information. So I think I needed to go over to ChatGPT, splurge on the deep research and see what it says.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem too with the 23andMe data is it's very limited in what they give
Yes.
you, even when you have downloaded the most rigorous data. And depending on when you did it, that data might not be as good as if you did it today because they're analyzing for changes. But I think it's interesting to hear that. I mean, here on the Grow Everything podcast, we're always talking about the ways that biology is being used as a technology to make the world a better place. And AI is a big part of that because AI helps us to translate the complexity of biology, which our human minds can't really understand. There was a nice Times article about the use of AI in drug discovery, where these researcher from the University of Pennsylvania was using AI to look for drugs for people with rare diseases. And in a lot of cases, what they're finding is repurposed drugs, drugs that exist for one purpose or drugs that had not really been used for a rare disease actually can be useful. So it was an interesting use of AI. And this guy, Dr. Feigenbaum, he has a model where he's comparing 4,000 drugs against 18,000 diseases. And we'll put the link in the show notes because I thought it was a fascinating story. It talks about a guy with a rare disease that this guy, Dr. Feigenbaum, has helped. It's just another way that AI is being used to improve people's health, but also to increase our knowledge of biology.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I mean, what's going on in drug development is very fascinating. And if you were to tell me 20 years ago that we would be able to use generative AI to create molecules and then be able to compare 4,000 drugs against 18,000 diseases just using a computer, it's like, what? That would be so bizarre. But here we are. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think a year ago, I had probably said something like there's 80 or 90% of diseases still not treatable. So I wonder if this is going to be something that shrinks that faster. I know that in our conversations, I've said, look, what's going to eventually happen is we might have a digital twin, like a digital model of our personal selves. And as we encounter disease or immune system is weakened, AI would tell us what we need to eat or what medicines we need to tap into. And a lot of those medicines are going to be the ones that are on these databases and medicines that haven't yet been created that you might take for a short period of time, but always that idea of keeping your immune system at homeostasis or keeping it as healthy as possible. But yeah, so it's fascinating times. I love this story. I think it was a good one. I think we'll put the link in the show notes so people can check it out. But there's so much other news going on, and I don't think we really have the time to get into it today. But I just think we should mention Colossal Biosciences. It's a George Church company, among other things. They've been working on bringing back the woolly mammoth. They released a woolly mouse, and we didn't talk about it, but it seems like there's a lot of stuff going on at Colossal. We want to get them on the podcast. And I know that they made fun of it on the Saturday Night Live news 2 weeks ago, which I haven't watched the clip, but I'll have to go back and check it out. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't. Oh my gosh, I definitely did go check it out because when we went to dinner, we hung out with one of our friends of the pod who also was on the board of Colossal, Chris Mason, and he was telling us a bit about the woolly mammoth. We didn't really dig too much into the science, like which genes were introduced or how the genome of the mice was edited. Of course, we can find a link to all the information and share it in the show notes, but it's interesting to see how they're going about introducing their science. The hairy mice is one thing. They have so many other projects that they're working on. So how they start revealing their work to the public is going to be very important. I think it's going to be very important to capture the attention of the public and the curiosity versus making a joke out of it. I mean, I don't know what the Saturday Night Live clip is. I mean, any publicity is good publicity, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be very important because I think there's a lot of criticism about the $10 billion valuation. How are they going to make $100 billion, right? If you have a $10 billion valuation, you're expected to make $100 billion in revenue. So what is that going to look like over the years? So very cool.
Well, if those hairy mice were sprayed with a compound and you grow hair because of it, that's probably worth several $billion because I know the balding market is very big. And if you could spray your head with something that's going to grow a lot of hair, I think people would be all over it.
Oh, so these mice are induced to grow hair, but they should be induced to be balding to be able to create a compound that can then reintroduce hair.
Well, they could have been bald mice because there are mice genetically engineered to be bald or hairless. If it's done on a topical level without it having to be genetically engineered, that's multi-billions in revenue right
Yes.
there.
Oh my God. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so Colossal, as I mentioned, is a George Church company. George Church is on the board there. And Dan Goodwin, who we're interviewing today, actually worked in George Church's lab. How do you know Dan, Erum?
Dan, I met through our friend Alex Rose of Cascade. And we co hosted an event with Alex and Dan at the New Lab. That was the first time I met Dan. And I was blown away by his personality, his intellect when it comes to both science and entrepreneurship. You guys will hear from him and you're like, oh, yep, your mom was right. He is all those things. And the work that they're doing at Homeworld is incredible. This domain of climate biotech, which is the world of grow everything. So we have a lot of synergy with Homeworld. We did also publish their interview with George Church a few episodes back.
Yeah, I mean, they operate as a nonprofit, which is fascinating. They give grants out. If you don't hear it in this, you'll hear it in the episode that we hosted with them. They're constantly giving out grants. They're focused on things like carbon capture, greenhouse gas removal, geobiotech, and pollution. Pollution's a big one. And I think what they're doing is fascinating. So let's let Dan take it away.
All right, Dan Goodwin, Homeworld Collective, brother from another podcast. That is the Climate Biotech podcast. Thank you for coming on the Grow Everything podcast. How's it going?
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Yay, yeah. We're friends. We've been collaborating. We published your episode where you interviewed George Church, which was amazing. And you guys published our episode with Moji Karimi of Semvita. So we're buddies in this world of podcasting, biotech in all different forms. But you've known George Church for a while. You were taught by him. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to learn from George and be friends with him? He seems like a very interesting person. And if there's any secrets you can share, just let us know. We won't tell anybody.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. And it really has been such a wonderful friendship. When we were giving the preamble for the podcast that we were boosting of emojis, I was reflecting on the great New York biotech meetup that we did together.
Oh, yeah.
And that was really fun. And Homeworld is huge fans of what you guys do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what's it like to work with George? Well, I got a little bit of context with who I was when I started my PhD. I was a 30-year-old ex-software founder tech bro.
Wow.
Wow, I didn't know that.
There's no way around it. Troll me away. I was basically every stereotype you can possibly imagine. I lived in a garage. I dropped out of Stanford, all the bad tropes. And what took me to do my PhD was that I dropped out of a first attempt at Stanford, which was in AI. And I got to work with the amazing Fei-Fei Li, who's a heroic figure in many dimensions. And I was running a company that was beginning to do well. That was what tech bro version of Dan really wanted. And I just had this moment where it's like, one day I'm going to be a dad, which I am now. And I want to be a heroic figure to my kids. Where that took me was I'm going to go back. I want to earn my black belt in science. What took me back was to work on neuroscience. What is heroic to me? Studying the brain, understanding that. That is one of the biggest frontiers of humanity. What I was not expecting was Tech Bro Dan was taking the software view of biology. So I wrote this thing, which is very cringy now. And so I'm just kind of making fun of younger version of me. But I wrote this piece in Scientific American. It's like, neuroscience needs hackers. Congratulations. All we need is software people. We're going to drop right in and we're going to solve everything. And I look back at that 10 years later and I cringe, but I think that's the way things work. The reason I'm laughing at myself now is I didn't appreciate how hard it is to work with biology. It was computer science that got me into neuro. It was neuro that got me into synthetic biology. And then getting into synthetic biology got me to meet George Church. And there's that quip of never meet your heroes. I think that's actually wrong. If you meet your heroes and you're disappointed, get better heroes. So when I did my PhD, I got really lucky where I had 3 heroic figures. So I did my PhD under Ed Boyden. I can sing his praises all day. Amazing, superhuman. So he was my core advisor. And that's where we were building molecular tools to study the brain. His lab was called Synthetic Neurobiology, and it's using SynBio to study the brain. Working with that, I actually backed into that to meet George. So I think it's actually even funnier to say that Tech Bro Dan didn't even know who George Church was. Dan, 6 months into biology, every road leads back to George Church.
Right.
So what I'll say is that George is the real deal. I mean, he really is a fantastic force of nature for the field of biology. I'm giving a lot of background here, but I think it's really going to go into the way I do work now, the way Homeworld Collective tries to support the community. A lot of it is inspired by George. But if you want to know a good one-line punchy thing of what did I learn from George, I'm going to say it, and it's going to make it sound like he's manipulative, and that's totally wrong. And I don't mean that. So I mean, it's like George has a trick of speaking, and a person might interpret that like, oh, that means it's manipulative. No. I just think this is a wonderful way to be persuasive and communicate. And I call this the Churchian juxtaposition. And it would go like this. I'd say like, hey, George, I'm looking at some in situ sequencing chemistry and blah, blah, blah. And then George would start by taking my idea and then going way deeper than I was technically, way deeper. He's like, oh, this reminds me of this mustard chemistry paper from 1970. And that was followed on by this paper by 73. And oh, then you're going to get these steric effects and blah, blah, blah. And like, okay. And then once you've gone way deeper technically thought, then George is going to take you to the moon. He's like, okay. And then when we're engineering panspermia to travel the cosmos using lasers pushing around nucleic acids to take over planets, then we're going to do this. And then your mind is blown like, wow, he has thought 500 years in the future on this idea. And then he'll titrate you back to, okay, so now the idea that you brought me today, here's the way you can think about it for the next year or two.
Right. It's amazing. It is amazing.
What's so fun about that is I actually think it's a really great way of being persuasive. At Homeworld, we are a nonprofit whose job it is to grow the field of climate biotech. You do that by empowering the community. So we think all the things that we do is how can you make a scientist more self-sufficient, better self-advocate, all those things. You can take this George Church idea. First of all, you can't fake it. You have to be that technically good to go back to some paper 40 years ago and then draw the reference from that. And then you also have to have a big creativity and imagination to go to engineered panspermia. I mean, I don't know if George is actually pushing that idea, just giving a fun, playful example.
Right.
And then you have to be able to land it back if this is what's realistic to do. So you need the technical excellence, you need the creativity, and then you need the executive sense of what's worth doing and what's not. I call it the Churchian juxtaposition or whatever you want to say. It always sits with me. And that's actually something I try to coach people is you have to be grounded technically, do stuff that people want to listen to in the first place. Then once you've got people's attention, say something that's plausible. Otherwise, it's just idea porn.
Totally.
Yeah. The Churchian juxtaposition sounds like a great title for a blog on a Substack.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting that you say that because when John Carbers and I interviewed him for What's Your Bio Strategy, I was like, we were going into it. I mean, I'd been around George and knew him, had seen him talk a number of times and was going into it as, okay, we're going to talk about synthetic biology. But George immediately takes over the interview and he's talking about germline editing with CRISPR and what that is going to look like from a progression point of view. First, you're going to go after these genetic diseases. Then you're going to go after performance. And it's going to be these people who are going to be the first ones who will do that. And I was just mind blown, even though every time I would see him speak and he does his disclaimer slide that shows all the companies that he's a part of, you're just kind of like, whoa, what the hell, dude? What do you do? Would you sleep? And he does. So an amazing human being that I think really happy to have had some interactions with. But let's bring it back and talk about Homeworld Collective. You guys say biology is the most powerful technology on Earth, which we completely agree with. But what makes biology so uniquely vast and transformative compared to other tools or technologies? And I even hate to say biology is a technology. It is. It just is.
Yeah, it's a medium to technologies. So my one sentence view on this is that biology is a medium to atomically precise, infinitely scalable technologies. I think both are important. Both are very independent. So atomically precise is that biology is filled with detecting the difference of one hydrogen present or not level technologies, binding metals, adding electron here, removing electron there. All these technologies are exquisitely developed over the lifetime of Earth. So I think there is a atomic precision that often we have to brute force with other mechanisms that biology has. The infinitely scalable comment is both necessary and probably the most controversial because infinitely scalable is uncontrolled growth. So you could say in engineering speak, I'd say it's zero capex. You don't need to build a $100 million factory. You just need a bug that takes over the world. Now, that's, of course, backing into biosecurity issues and all those things. So what I think is true, the provocation in that idea is that biology has the ability to do atomically precise mechanisms and operations today. It's infinitely scalable in terms of it's already everywhere on the planet. It can grow. You don't need a factory to develop it. But the truth is, really, I've seen very few true open deployments. Nobody's really making use of zero capex bio yet. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for it. But I think if you look at where we're at with a lot of the industries that are climate relevant, that biology could potentially take over or change or modify, they are very CapEx intensive industries. And we're not going to change that in the next 10 years or so. But a personal passion area or a thesis that I'm actively playing with, so I don't have a bulletproof answer today, is what do low OpEx solutions look like? The extreme of that, and this is a Churchian way of viewing it, the extreme of that is you drop a seed or you drop a cell, and it does everything from there.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's how the earth works today. You don't have to spend a lot of money to the earth continue to operate. It's doing it itself. At Homeworld, we're looking at environmental issues and being able to create solutions. And it's interesting to see how the earth is already doing it, but maybe slowly. So how do you make it faster? I just love your hypothesis. I feel like that can be blown out. I'm sure you've dreamed on it. You have this extensive background, so rare. What do you see as a future of bioengineering to be able to reduce that CapEx or have none? You said the seed, for what? Like, what could it do?
Yeah. I'll start with a straw man, and then we can go into, I think, areas that are important. The straw man is that it's really easy from a biologist perspective who spends all day at the bench to read a paper or be doing some work and think, oh, one step above this next, I can do blah, and I've solved everything. I can do protein engineering. I can design a protein to bind lithium better. Oh my gosh, I can make the affinity, blah, blah, blah better. I've solved mining. Right? Yeah. And I want to roast that person because that was also me. That was me in 2019. That was actually almost literally me. It was like, hey, I'm finally learning how to do some protein engineering. I really care about carbon capture. That seemed like that was my gateway drug to thinking about climate issues because it was the first time that climate was reframed from a problem to a solution. And I was like, oh, okay, well, great. I can do protein engineering. We need a protein binder to bind carbon dioxide because that's how you bind CO2 and atomic precision. We can bind CO2. We know like that's what the body does. And that, of course, is a very, very, very stupid idea. And it's a very, very stupid idea once you think one step past the lab to be like, okay, well, what's it going to be deployed into? Okay, it's going to be deployed in an air contactor. Okay, what does the air contactor do? Well, it's going to have either a solid or a liquid sorbent. Okay, how much does that sorbent currently cost? What are the performance metrics of that sorbent? And what would it take for anyone to care about my sorbent? So I got really lucky. I got to meet with Klaus Lackner, who's one of the godfathers of carbon dioxide removal. And he told me, like, basically, we had a short conversation. And in 15 minutes, I was just like, okay, I'm so sorry I've wasted your time. I'm 5 orders of magnitude off of ever doing anything that would matter in your field. Wow. Yeah. And by the way, to talk about another gentle giant, Klaus was just the nicest, most friendly, supportive human. So that's the straw man. It's really easy to immediately imagine something you could do on the bench. This is what we do as biologists. It's really important to dream. So I don't want to disparage that at all. It then needs to be matched with the things at the frontier scale, which is, okay, this would matter. And that also is a place where you have traps. And I guess part of my job as a community builder now is roasting both sides to bring people together. The roast of the people who just spend all day at the policy level or the $100 million fund level, especially in the philanthropy or science funding, they just spend time at the problem. Oh, we need a gigaton of carbon capture. And let's write a big white paper on carbon capture and how important it is to get to the gigaton. But there's no actual technical insights there. There's nothing actionable. When people write those things, it's just $1 billion pile of money talking to another $1 billion pile of money. And that's also dumb. Somewhere between, you need to start drawing that line between the frontier goal that matters, the technical work that could be done. And I think that's really where Homeworld sits. The way you do that is you have to start picking verticals that matter. And I feel funny saying this to you guys because you guys know this better than anyone. And the way we've done this at Homeworld is we've gone vertical to vertical. And this was not the way we started. By the way, part of this is retroactive impression, but we started with we just want to grow the field of climate biotech. Then we go into climate biotech, there's a lot there, but to really help people on specific things, you really have to start knowing the vertical. So we started with carbon capture. That was a gateway drug. We broadened that to greenhouse gas removal. What started with CDR, that broadens into methane removal. Today is the submission deadline for our second round of grants for greenhouse gas removal. So for the people listening to this, sorry, this was last week. Yeah. We still want to talk if you're doing cool work. Where we're expanding now is to geobiotechnology and to pollution. All of those topics have frontier goals that matter. That working backwards, you start asking, okay, well, what are the teams or entities that currently operate at a scale that matters? If you're going to talk about mining, tell me about what it's like to run a mine. Show me the financial model of what it means to make a mine. Go all the way down, and then eventually you find the technical work that needs to be done. It's a long rant because I think we've all seen these failure modes where people say, I've got this really, really fancy thing I could do with biology. And then you see them a year later, they're like, yeah, no one cared.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech.
Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
Right.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I think at the beginning, when I don't know how to say this the right way, but I'm going to say when you're younger, let's put it that way, and you're still, and listen, I love ideas. The people I like hanging around with are idea people. That's what really gets me going. But then on the business side, I know the ideas don't matter. What matters is, do you got a good story? Is it going to scale? Is there a market for what you're doing? And then at the end of the day, are you going to be able to do something good with it? So I hear you. And I love this idea of taking verticals and applying that because we're doing something similar. But again, I think this is the reason why we get along so well is like we're looking at it from this idea of you're building these ecosystems so that you can make a difference. And you guys are taking the climate approach, whereas we're taking it from, okay, there's big companies that need these problems solved. How do we put them in with these innovators that also have a different problem? And their problem is they've got the technical excellence. They maybe are starting to learn how to tell a story, but they have no idea how to get to that scale. So I think with us collectively, Homeworld Messaging Lab, we are going to enable these things.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Can I just like one sentence on that, which is my phrase is idea porn.
Yeah, I love that.
And I use it in a technical way, which is porn is a fantasy that you never actually want to act on, right? And I think idea porn is this space of ideas like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? I'm going to let myself not think about how I would act on. I'm just going to go down into idea porn. And I actually think it's great. I think a program on pollution started from my idea porn hole in 2021, 2022. Gosh, that was a bad sentence, but hopefully we're on the same page there, right?
Maybe we'll leave it. I don't know.
But I think the failure mode I've seen is that people go into idea porn and don't know it's idea porn. Yeah. They're fooling themselves that actually like, hey, this is a really cool idea. I'm going to enjoy that. But deep down, they know they're never going to act on it and they don't. But then there's this gross self-deception. If you say, I'm going into an idea porn because I think this is really cool and I'm just going to explore it, that's actually where I think some really great ideas can come from. But it's about setting expectations of, I'm going to let myself differentiate, separate from reality for a little bit to explore a passion area. Because my gosh, if you're doing something that you think is the coolest thing on the planet, then you're unstoppable.
Yeah. I want to add to that because I love this idea of going down the idea porn hole.
Oh my God. You can't say that.
It sounds wrong.
It's so wrong.
But the idea porn rabbit hole. Anyway.
Oh my God.
I'm going to go on my soapbox for a minute because one of the things that I'm seeing, and I really enjoy seeing this, is I'm seeing some people and people who've been on this podcast who are now starting to write fiction with biotech front and center. And I think that's really super important because it allows us to use this idea porn and turn it into a story that maybe someone is going to read or someone is going to think about, and it's maybe going to spark another idea. And I think that it's super important because this culture that we have of biologists and people doing biotech, doing synthetic biology, we have this echo chamber that we live in and we all promote each other and love each other, but we don't do enough of getting out there. I mean, the people in this room right now, we do it, and that is the mission of our podcast. But I think that if our culture is not set up to help people think what it's going to be like in 100, 200, 500 years, then we're missing a huge opportunity. And I hate to bring it up, but I think when we look at Elon Musk, I mean, Elon Musk was not reading scientific papers growing up. He was reading Ringworld and Asimov and these kinds of big thinking science fiction ideas. And we don't really have that much of that in our culture
today,
or telling our cultural story. And we definitely need a lot more of that. So if it requires going down the idea porn rabbit hole, I'm all for it. And for those of you who are listening, I'm always ready to read a good biotech fiction story, no matter what state it's in, because I like the ideas. So Let's get back to the interview. A lot of people see biology as something to control or extract value from. And I know we've had long conversations with Christina Agapakis about this. You guys at Homeworld, you're taking a different stance. You see it as a collaborator. What does that mean to collaborate with biology? And how does collaborating with biology shift the way you think about innovation?
There's a good metaphor with rivers. My dad, hero number one in life, he spent his whole life on the eco-hydraulic engineering. So how does engineering river systems or studying river systems help us understand when we clean up oil spills or what the impacts of dams are? And his whole career had a really good collaboration back and forth with the Corps of Engineers. And there was a joke that I just remember seeing some kind of environmentalists roasting the Corps of Engineers because they were making fun of the Corps of Engineers saying, the river is curving when it should run straight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Rivers curve because of physical processes depositing sediment differentially on the speed of the water. So that's going to make curves happen over time. It actually creates a positive feedback loop of curves in the river. That happens. When you're the Corps of Engineers, you want it to run straight. Then you have the Los Angeles River and all that magnificence. I don't think it's bad to think that way. I just think that we see these things in biology where we try to force it a little bit too early. It's a big open question about how we're going to solve this and for things like biomanufacturing. Putting things into a tank and growing them is the straight river of biology. There's a lot that's wrong in that comment. And what's wrong is I think we're all friends with the masters of biomanufacturing. There's really cool companies that are coming out of stealth now, doing new ways of doing biomanufacturing, continuous fermentation. There's all this stuff that is cool. And I want to say one more thing about this is that I am not an expert. If someone hasn't done something at leader scale minimum, they have no opinion that matters on biomanufacturing. I have no opinion that matters on biomanufacturing. I do think there's this idea of how do you start doing what biology is best at? It's very possible that things that we've tried to do in fermentation in the past just have not worked, not because the science wasn't cool, but because the business just didn't pan out when you're trying to do something at scale. We're currently seeing a huge death of companies that were 2020 vintage, funded on the hopes and dreams. Now the whole field has changed, everything from the fermentation stacks to that. Now, enough dumping on biomanufacturing because we do need it.
Yeah.
I think there are things that are really important. And for certain new molecules, that is where you can use atomic precision of biology to the best of its capacity. But then at the same time, we start wondering, okay, well, how do you start? If we want to go beyond the tank, what are ways that look viable? A great example of this is some of the early conversations we were doing with carbon capture. It doesn't take you many Google clicks to start caring about mine tailings. So mines grind up rocks, dump them in a plague place. Those rocks over time weather and they create carbonates, which is an effective drawdown of carbon dioxide. Can biology make it go faster? So there's really great people that have researched this. So Ian Powers, and he was now a professor, his PhD advisor was Greg Dipple, Janine McCutcheon. There's a whole great crop of researchers that have worked on this. It's their work. I'm pretty sure it's all in their public material. When they do these experiments, they find something where they say, look, we create an inoculant, we culture something up, we drop it on these rocks, and then we leave. What they find, and I'm saying they as in scientists in general, is that normally when you engineer a bug, it goes away within like a day. It just gets way outcompeted, knocked down. But what they still find, I think the large space of the field, is that some effect is still there, right? Even though your inoculant's long gone and that little gene that you dropped in actually doesn't make it compete naturally, you still have some net effect where things are working a little bit better. You're capturing a little bit more carbon, rock weathering a little bit faster. And I think that's the foundation of all the crazy work that we're doing now. That work was 10 years old that I remember reading 5 years ago. So also put big error bars on Dan's memory. But I think there's going to be this fine line of what does it look like to start letting things go naturally. That can be engineered crops, that can be engineered bugs and lakes. I think the more we can let biology do biology's thing, the better. I want to acknowledge that as there's a lot of open questions there, a lot. And I'm intentionally stepping over the ethical arguments and the security issue. And I'm going to give a shout out to Tessa Alexanian, who does a lot of biosecurity research. And her and I were having this debate. And I was playing the role of why do security? Why talk about biosafety and all this? And she looks at me and she quotes Renee.
Yeah, Risen of DARPA, ARPA-H, yeah.
Yeah, and the quote, I've been unable to find the line for, but I'm sure she said it, is that you don't put brakes on a car to go slow, you put brakes on a car to go fast.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, Tessa, you sold me. Bringing this back to this idea of we have to allow biology to make rivers that curve. Mm-hmm. To do that, we need to accept the fact that there's going to be some sort of open deployments. Let's start taking that seriously. My provocation is I've seen a lot of safety as like, oh, we just shouldn't do it at all. And the only people that do real biosafety stuff, like what are molecular tools that we can build, are the George Churches of the world. Pam Silver, Kevin Esfeld, a bunch of other research that have a certain amount of professional safety already. Whereas for young professor or like a young research org, that is a huge hot button topic that oftentimes people would be ostracized for even talking about. I think with the community building that you do and that we do at Homeworld, I hope we can start saying that actually, if we accept that this is needed, we can start having adult conversations about it. And I'll give one more shout out to a team. Daniel Neitzel runs a company called Liquid Trees, and he had a great thesis. His thesis was, if you want to do carbon capture at any scale that matters, all this idea of these big air conditioning machines suck. And the reason they suck is because you're trading off the volume for the observability. When you run your own machine and you catch things in the liquid sorbent, and you extract and you put in a tank, you bury it, you can have a full observability of all the stuff you're drawing. But that's never, ever, ever, ever going to get to a scale that I think matters. And that's my take. This is me speaking as Dan Goodwin, not Homeworld, not for the CDR community. Daniel has a salty, contrarian, tech bro energy too. And he's like, we need to drop this observability if we want any scale that matters. So what did he do? He's like, okay, well, where's a place that you can deploy biology today? How about really polluted rivers in the third world?
Okay.
And how about finding stuff that can just capture carbon and then sink and die? So salty, like none of the CDR funders would touch it because they're like, oh, it's reputation risk and this guy doesn't know anything about biology and all that. And I've been meeting with Daniel for 2 years. And every time he shows me what I'm doing, I'm like, my God, dude, you've got tanks, you're doing experiments, you've operated in 7 countries, you shut down 5 of them because the data wasn't there. You are doing more faster, more openly than a lot of people I've seen. And comes from a totally different angle. And I think that's an example of maybe now we're shifting into accepting that the rivers of biology have to curve, but there's definitely a culture change.
Yeah, there's so much that you said that is incredible. And I want to touch on a couple things. One is the analogy of river systems. I've heard, not in the same way that you've mentioned it, but I'm reading the book, A Natural History of the Future by Rob Dunn. And he starts off the whole novel about river systems and how his grandfather was witness to the Mississippi River flooding the towns because they were leveed and they built towns near the river, but the river couldn't be controlled. It had to break. And he uses this nice, beautiful, elegant analogy to rivers and biology too. So when you were saying that, I'm like, oh, you should definitely read that if you haven't already.
I haven't. Yeah, fascinating.
I love the fact that you talk about yourself in the third person. I think that's really cool. But also, you bring people to the table. These concepts are created by people, and you just have this running Rolodex of just dropping names. And I love that because then we can really be like, this isn't just a theory. These are people that are observing, they're pontificating, they're doing. I think it's super, super, super helpful. And we'll have to link those things in the show notes. I will say this concept of the in situ biomanufacturing, or applying a biosolution to it, is so interesting. Karl and I actually talked about that, I don't know, Karl, months ago. And I was like, what? And you said lake engineering. And I was like, do we have a hive mind? Because that's something that we were talking about. Why not allow nature to help with the ferment? Everyone's like, it must be sterile. Well, sterile, it's good for some things, depending on what you're trying to make, of course. But it's also so challenging and can be limiting too, because maybe there are other microbes that can appear. And if they work, they have their microbiome dynamics, maybe it's actually more helpful and less energy intensive to be able to create that bioprocess. And again, I also did not create a liter of product, so I can't speak to too much biomanufacturing besides reiterating what some of our guests have been talking about who are in that space.
I think we all need to just brew beer so that we can say that we have at least experience with 1 liter of fermentation. Otherwise...
Actually, I did take a beer making class one time.
Yeah, I have a kit in the basement that I've never used. I hate to admit it, Alejandro, if you're listening.
Yeah.
Maybe we just fund climate biotech by making GFP beer.
Yeah.
So
that's what you have to do.
I mean, surely someone's done that, but I don't know how immunogenic GFP is. But if you could just throw it in yeast, grow it, and then have beer that fluoresces at 48, I'd drink it.
Yeah.
That is one of the tropes, I guess, or one of the scenes in that Terrible Hackers series. It's a German series that takes place in Freiburg, and they have a party and the beer glows.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you also had mentioned about biosecurity, and we had Alexander Titus on the podcast when he was talking about biopolicy, and people think that, oh, policies and regulations prevent innovation, but it's actually there to help accelerate it, because you don't want to have a situation where something goes wrong and you have to backtrack and it sets a whole industry back years, whereas the policies would have helped continue the progress. So a lot of what you said resonated with what we've been talking about and hearing. And
This is why we wanted to bring you on, because you are our friend and we love talking to you about this.
One thing just to add briefly to that is that part of the origin of Homeworld was a blog post, which is why I really encourage all biologists to practice the art of writing. Write a blog, nobody's going to read it, get used to it. But the second essay I ever wrote was about why are some fields more productive than others? And I just took my experience of being in the startup world, working in the design world, starting my PhD in basically around genetic engineering in 2015, seeing that place go hyperbolic, makes me wonder, can you find what made machine learning go exponential and what made genetic engineering go exponential? Can you engineer that anywhere? And just riffing on the idea of what Titus is doing is that there are times where maybe you can actually cultivate the conditions. And I don't mean to hawk my own book from 2022, but I would just say I think there are 6 elements. And a big part of that is freedom to operate, freedom to experiment. And there has to be a moment of scale. And I'm going to cut myself off, otherwise I'm going to talk about old topics.
Yes, we absolutely are, because that is the next question.
Well, it's because I didn't know this. We talk about the work we're doing in the now. I didn't know about the company that you co-founded and that it was acquired by Microsoft. And that's a huge, huge win. And congratulations on that. And you were saying you took your tech bro world and you brought it to bio and you realized, okay, there's a little bit of similarities and there's differences. So can you dig into a little bit more, maybe a specific story of a lesson that you learned from building and scaling a software startup and how that translates into building a company at the intersection of biology and climate tech?
Yeah, there's a lot to say.
There's a lot to say.
I'm going to start with why software is so ideal. And then I hope that informs what we want to build. And then I can tell a little bit of insight on how we think about developing software products and how that can inform science and biology.
Perfect.
So I got really lucky. Right place, right time. I started my PhD at Stanford in 2009. Facebook mini feed came out, AWS came out, iPhone came out. And so it was this golden era where suddenly you had the ability to instantly scale things. It just became so baked into the culture of Silicon Valley that we just took it for granted. And I think that's one of the reasons I was such a bad biologist for so many years, because I just assumed that, hey, if I can write a little iPhone widget on my laptop, then I can scale it to 1 million people overnight. Done. That doesn't work in bio. That doesn't work in really any other field where you've got actual CapEx. MyIQ sold subscriptions, which was a 1 bit that I would change on a database when people would pay us. That's the easiest thing in the world you could possibly sell. But I think what's also really important about that era is that it was this explosion of empowerment. So I worked in a windowless office in the basement of the computer science building at Stanford. And I saw this transformation of everyone around me. By a year later, we were all standing on stages, pitching product market fit, pitching this new target of what people expected to hear from a 10-page startup deck. We can absolutely troll it. I'll be the first one to laugh about younger me, as well as older and present me. But there's also a lot of wonderful things about that too. There's this matching of expectations. And there was the hallway conversations you had in that era were just beautiful. You had these people in a computer vision lab. So it's like, oh, we could use cameras to recognize addresses and that can create recommendations. And you could do this and you can match it to medical devices. It was this huge matching of technologies to markets. What that took me to do is I worked on a bunch of dumb startups and they all failed. But I went to go to the design world. One thing that I think surprises people is the 2 biggest cultural drivers for me and the way I operate and the way I think about doing science. It was working in a toy lab and it's getting choked out in pajamas and jiu-jitsu on a regular basis. And I actually think both have a lot of beauty to them and importance. So it's very funny to think about working in a toy lab. The modus operandi there was rapid prototyping. And the spirit was good ideas float, bad ideas sink. So you focus on the things that float. You don't need to beat a bad idea to death. We made one app with Elmo that went to #1 in 4 categories and it was there for many years. So we built a really successful product. That was the result of a year of 50 different iterations. We started with potty training and we just kept building things, putting in front of kids and families, and then kept burning it to the ground, starting back up. So in the product design world, you build to grow. It was a free prototype that gave us the insight to make something. Same thing with MileIQ, by the way. We had a really clear idea. We're going to use the telemetry data on phones to track mileage that people are driving. Super unsexy topic. It really matched people's need. It took us 6 iterations before we found the real way of matching people and then taking it off. So we need to take for granted what made computer science so good is that you have the ability to scale things overnight instantly. What does this mean for biology and operating in biology? Well, one, I think there's a playfulness. I hope there's a playfulness that you hear that I took from my IDEO days and my toy lab days of just trying stuff. The really great biologists that I've met are also super playful. Hey, let's just try this, do this. I was taking this idea of prototyping from the design world, and I was trying to understand how I map that into experimental biology. So Sam Rodriguez, who now runs Future House and is just a super mega genius, runs one of the coolest hubs of AI and science I've seen. It was him who, in this conversation in a hallway outside the lab, where we were sharing our knowledge, where I was like, I'm this arrogant, quasi-successful tech bro, and he's this physics guy getting into biology, but he was really good, really, really good at prototyping. And what I realized is that he prototypes to kill,
Nice.
right?
Mhm.
I love that in the design world, you prototype to grow, and in science, you prototype to kill.
Mhm.
And I had this moment where I really credit Sam for coaching me into this and seeing this. And there was this one day where I thought, I've got this idea that we can barcode brains using ribosomes, and we're going to engineer ribosomal RNA, and it's going to go everywhere. In comes Sam's voice in my head, like, what is the cheapest way to possibly check this? And so for a $50 probe, dumped it on some cells, saw that it was never going to spread well enough. I was like, okay, done. A $50 experiment just saved me 6 months. Thank you, Sam. With science, you start as a junior scientist with no ideas, or you start with really dumb ideas, and then you burn them to the ground because all of your first ideas are dumb. And then when you get on the other side of it, like your next phase is you have too many ideas. There's all these things that you could do. And I think that's where this idea of prototyping really fast to kill is what separates people from being good to great. What we do now, I would say how that now takes into what we do at Homeworld is I take this idea of how do you prototype rapidly. And for a lot of stuff that is one day going to scale to anything that matters, you can do a paper prototype before you even start. And a paper prototype is if you want to build something for mining, just to pick up that example, which because I think it's a good one because mines are so complex. If you can't tell me where in the mine industry that your thing's going to slot into, just stop
Yeah.
or pause,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's an Excel prototype. It's a paper prototype. You don't even need to order genes. But not just to whine about this is actually something we're doing at Homeworld, which is that everyone feels the need and the urgency to figure out onshore metals in America. So a lot of people are looking at it. A lot of people are reading DARPA RFPs and all that stuff. Our way of helping is we're making the scaffold for that paper prototype. So maybe by the time this comes out, or maybe a week later, we've been working on open source financial models for biology in copper. This is the difference between a rare earth mine and a copper mine is night and day. So we can't make it everything for everyone is the nothing for nobody. So we're starting really, really small, quote unquote. Jamie and Jesse are working on this. Please don't kill me for calling it small. But we're making a financial model. And the idea of that is that you can make a paper prototype of your tech today. Because the worst thing you could do is make something really, really hard that has zero value.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just so our listeners know, copper mining traditionally involves a fair amount of biology. So it's not like we're going to go into copper mines and suddenly introduce something that isn't already there. Potentially what we're looking at is making the biological processes more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like 20% right now is bioleached. And I know there's a company that's spinning out of Rio Tinto called Newton, N-U-T-O-N, that's looking to have 50% of their copper come from bioleaching. And they're just focusing on the biology of it, which is really interesting. But I love this idea of prototype to kill. I had met with Glenys Mera. She's the director of biolabs at NYU Langone. And we were just at an event and she was talking about it would be so cool to have shared data sets of failure. Because there's culture of success. This is the data that made the successful outcome. But that failed data set is equally as valuable for people that might be going down that same path, but maybe they would not because they knew that experiment would fail anyway. So if anyone out there is working on failure, we want you on the pod.
Yeah. A history of failure. I think we should do an episode. This is like Symbio fails or biotech fails.
Yeah.
So if you're an expert and you can give us a long list of them, we want to talk to you because I think it would make for a great episode.
Yeah.
There's a very good essay written by Devin Stork called When to Quit.
Yeah.
I think it's a good marching order, especially for younger biologists.
I know we're getting close to the hour, so I want to be very mindful of your time, our time. I feel like we could keep talking all day, and we'll have to have you back. But you're supporting these really interesting climate positive technologies. What are some of the more exciting things that you can share in your network or outside of it that could fundamentally change how we interact with the planet? I mean, you gave such an elegant way of us thinking about how to work with biology and not confining it to steel reactors.
So a couple of things immediately come to mind. One, I think there's this frontier work that's coming. One of my early provocations in starting Homeworld was to rethink chemical manufacturing that can fit in your hand, right? And this actually goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. It's like, you can do atomically precise, infinitely scalable. What does the chemical manufacturing plant of the future look like? It could fit in your hand. Maybe you have the arithmetic logical unit, which is the ALU that sits inside computers. Could you just have things that they click together and tiny little things and have flow cells doing chemistry and all that? But a lot of the things that you do that are relevant for chemistry manufacturing operate in regimes that life would never exist in. So the term here is organic solvents, which is if you drop a cell in it, it shreds the cell immediately. And one of our recipients of our first round of garden grants is a wonderful human named Samuel Thompson. Don't mean to pitch our own book, but we had a really fun podcast with him. And he's got this whole beautiful view of the way he does science, is like identity-driven science. He puts his queerness and his identity into the work, and it's so awesome. But when we got a grant proposal, media's like, we're going to fund that. It's just so
nice.
well. And it's basically, how do you make proteins operate where life can't? So it turns out this is an idea that's been around biology since the 80s. Can you make proteins fold where there's not water or there's very, very little water? And this is what his work is doing. And it's had to make foundational tools to do it. This is one of those coolest situations where now you're taking atomically precise tools from biology and you're putting it in inhospitable places where there is no life. Maybe this is a spot where the river can run straight. So really, really excited by that. Another recipient of garden grants is Anum. I'm talking my own book. I don't mean to. Also had her on the podcast, but she's this protein engineering leader who had this wild idea that she can express sweet proteins on yeast. And so can you make yeast multiple flavors? And it's this really cool example of cutting edge protein engineering done in a really fun, playful way. If you hear her story, she's like, I was making my husband eat this yeast out of a falcon tube. And that's what we want. So I think those are some of the examples there. I think the provocation that I would really push on is the importance of thinking about the pollution space too, because there's things that we try to force biology to solve that maybe they're not best for. I think it's really worth owning that if you can do it with thermochemistry, do it with thermochemistry. You can't just shove bio because it's cool. When are the situations where you're inherently in a biological problem? So a biological solution might actually be best. The idea porn, to take us back into that cringy phrase that we were using earlier, for me was every animal, every single cell organism on the planet has some sort of thing that life didn't make inside it now. We've got some PFAS, we've got some microplastic, we've got some of that. So can you engineer the resilience to these things? We have a pollution program now, and the woman who's running it is Sarah Daniels. She's amazing. She did her PhD in this space, and because it was such an underfunded, underappreciated spot at the time, there's no work to continue that on. A lot happens in the past few years. This is what Homeworld tries to do, is to try to rally the support. I almost created a company in this space in 2022, but then I realized that it just wasn't going to work on a VC timeline. So now we get to support it from the nonprofit, from institute level thinking. So that's one area where how can you start really creating the field to think about, hey, all these things in the world are either tackleable, we can either get rid of them in situ, or we can engineer the resilience against them. And I love that space. I'm going to throttle myself here. Happy to go into details if that topic is interesting.
I love that concept, the in situ, just thinking of it that way versus separate from the actual problem. But since we're wrapping up, I do have one question that's going to be a nice wrap-up question, and you touched on a little bit. But if you were to start a company, let's say down the line, I know you thought about this one you just mentioned, but what would it be? And then the second part of the question is, how can people engage with Homeworld? We know that there's a variety of ways, but let's collect our audiences, let's collect our community together, because we all need to be working together.
Yeah. The two spaces that I'm most interested in is platforms that can treat diseases caused by pollution as an engineerable task. My current read is it is not a VC backable concept yet. I think the space of the subclinical toxicology is probably the buzzword for it. It's just missing the foundations that gave us immuno-onc. It's missing the foundations that gave us this neuroscience and the cancer atlas, all those things. They were based on huge open data sets. The tumor atlas, the Allen brain atlas, like all these things. So I think to really treat molecular up tools for biological resilience and curing diseases by pollution, it's missing a lot of data sets. That is one thing I'm hoping Homeworld can do. And in the future, I would love to be healing people that have been made sick by chemicals. At the other side of the human health is the brownfields. So there's a lot of mines in the US that people will not take a single atom off that site, because as soon as you do, you assume the liability of a bunch of environmental disaster. So to be able to be that person who's like, I'm not afraid of that.
Yeah.
I'll take an atom off that. Yeah. I think is going to be really exciting. Something we're working on at Homeworld last year was helping people do the economic thinking around your science early, was something that we worked on using AI for techno-economic analyses. So the vision there was that you can read any paper and immediately create at the scaffold for how somebody would write the economic model of what it would look like in a pilot. We did that for a year. Actually, finally, that blog post is coming out in the work. And then the result of that was one of the people that worked on that project created a company. So that's Jesse Liu, created a company called Conductor, using artificial intelligence to do techno-economic analysis thinking for early stage startups. I think the provocation is that if AI can do something for free, can you just do it preemptively for all the idea space in bio? And the short answer is kinda. That's going to be low quality. And I think that's useful. But then there's also people who have something in hand and need to think about what that might be to deploy. And I think that's what Jesse's doing so well at Conductor Labs.
I love that. Okay. I think we want to check it out because that's something our clients are looking for.
Yeah.
Some of our clients.
Yeah. I sat in on your recording with Jesse when you guys were doing your Climate Biotech podcast, which we'll put that in the show notes when that goes live. But it was incredible. He's so smart. I've met him a couple times. It was so thorough, but also so grounded. The reality of entrepreneurship when it comes to developing biological applications that people miss, but even if it's not perfect, it's a start and it helps you start thinking of what are the economics behind the biology. And then that's the thing with AI. It's not going to tell you everything perfectly, but it could help you get there. And you have to also participate. You have to give it some information, take some information out. That's the two-way street. And when you have that iterative cycle, then you'll get something pretty decent. But can we do like a Joe Rogan 2-hour episode? You guys have like
Lex Friedman, 3.5, 4 hours.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you so much.
Sponsored by Adderall.
Yeah, we've never done it. Daniel, you might be the one where we're like, welcome to this special episode of Grow Everything. We've got Daniel Goodwin today.
Yeah,
we'll
cozy up, grab your tea. This is going to be a wonderful evening.
We hope you hit some traffic.
Yeah. Or if you're doing your marathon practice, Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the Grow Everything podcast. This has been a real treat. So much information. We loved having you on.
Yeah,
it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Nice. We're going to have you on again. You will become a regular. Thank you so much, Daniel. Erum, what did you think of this interview with Dan? He is our friend. I feel like we've known him forever.
Yeah, we could have kept that conversation going. That's one of the things when you talk to Dan, your mind expands. There's so many things we talked about in this episode. He had this running list of people and their accomplishments in his mind, but he's a perfect person to build this community of scientists and entrepreneurs really working together to solve big problems when it comes to our climate.
Yeah, I mean, and I love the way that he frames things. Some of his terms that I wrote down was zero capex bio. In the past, when we talked to Massimo Portancaso of Arsenale, we talked about how biotech firms and how firms in general have to rethink investments in capital expenditures and operating expenses because the engineering of an organism becomes a capital expense, but actually putting that organism into the fermentation tanks is really more of a operational expense. So it forces a rethinking of the way people are investing. And then my favorite phrase from Dan was, let's let biology do biological things. Why are we forcing biology to do things that it wasn't meant to do? It doesn't mean that we're not engineering biology, nor should we engineer biology. It's just kind of thinking about engineering biology in a way that it can operate like biology. And I just absolutely love that.
That's a great way of thinking. It was also cool that he was like, look, I was a tech bro, but he was also a toy bro. How awesome that he worked at a toy lab and created this Elmo app, this mindset of rapid prototyping. He's bringing that all to the table. I love that.
Yeah, he compared paper prototyping to rapid prototyping. And I love that as well, because I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're an entrepreneur and you came into this late and you're listening to the ending of this podcast, you should go back and listen to Dan talk about paper prototyping.
Yeah, very cool. I loved the fact that he mentioned the idea of using AI for techno-economic analysis. I mean, that seems like the perfect way for AI to be used.
For sure.
That's also in the world of paper prototyping, I guess.
Yeah.
Being able to be like, is this company economically viable or is this a really cool science project? So his friends at Conductor Labs are working on that. We'll certainly put a link to that. I love it. And our friends at Synonym also have a TEA tool. So understanding how to use that is very valuable to anyone that's really thinking in terms of scale. Really having a company is about making money. It doesn't have to be scale in terms of volume of things. It could be scale in terms of the amount of money you're making. people in the world of beauty and cosmetics, they're not making huge volumes of stuff, but they are making a bunch of money on smaller volumes.
Yeah, if they're smart. Yeah.
I digress.
All right. So we have to have Dan come back on. He's so smart and he is part of this network of ours. And I think we should do more stuff together because I think we are of like minds and we're trying to help very similar kinds of people.
Thank you so much for listening. Let us know your questions. Remember that this podcast is for the biotech industry. So if you have any guests that should be coming on or any topics that we should be deep diving on, or if you are that guest, please let us know. Reach out to us. In the show notes, you'll find the Grow Everything hotline, our emails. Please get in touch. And that's the pod.
All right. That's the pod. We'll talk to you later.